Sometime around 1180, a teenage boy escaped his captors by hiding underwater in a river, breathing through a hollow log, a wooden slave collar still locked around his neck from months of captivity after a rival clan murdered his father and abandoned his family to starve on the open steppe. That boy's name was Temujin. You know him better as Genghis Khan. And the dynasty his grandson eventually founded in China lasted only 97 years, the shortest of any dynasty covered on this channel so far. Built by a family that, at its absolute peak, controlled more contiguous land than any empire in human history, before or since. This is the story of the Yuan Dynasty. To understand it, you have to start decades before it existed, on a steppe where dozens of Mongol and Turkic clans spent generations raiding, betraying, and slaughtering each other in an endless cycle nobody had ever managed to break. Temujin's own father, a minor clan leader, was poisoned by rival tribesmen when Temujin was around 9 years old. Their own clan promptly abandoned the widow and her children, rather than support a family with no protector. For years afterward, Temujin's family survived on marmots, roots, and fish, a level of poverty most Mongol nobility never experienced. That humiliation shaped everything that came next. It also made him dangerous early. According to Mongol oral tradition, later written down as the secret history of the Mongols, a teenage Temujin killed his own older half-brother in a fight over a stolen fish and songbird, a small theft that, in a starving household with nothing else, apparently felt worth killing over. His own mother reportedly compared him to a wild dog for it. Temujin rebuilt his position not through inherited loyalty, which he'd learned could evaporate overnight, but by promoting capable men, regardless of birth, and binding former enemies to him personally. It was a radical departure from how steppe politics had always worked, and it made him almost impossible to betray. In 1206, a great assembly of Mongol and Turkic leaders formally proclaimed him Genghis Khan, roughly meaning universal ruler. For the first time in living memory, the steppe was unified under one authority. It would not stay contained to the steppe for long. Alongside the new title came a new legal code, the Yasa, covering everything from military discipline to religious tolerance to the treatment of foreign envoys. It applied to every subject of the empire, regardless of rank or tribe. Itself a genuinely unusual concept on a steppe where law had always bent around whoever held the most power. The army itself reflected the same philosophy. Genghis Khan deliberately broke up old tribal units and mixed soldiers from formerly rival clans into new ones, answering only to commanders promoted on ability. A shepherd's son with real talent could end up commanding the grandsons of men who'd once looked down on his entire family. It's part of why the loyalty that had failed his own father so completely never failed Genghis Khan himself. Genghis Khan turned that unified army against his neighbors almost immediately. First the Tangut Kingdom of Western Xia, then the Jurchen-ruled Jin Dynasty controlling northern China. These weren't quick raids. They were the opening moves of a conquest that would eventually reach 3 continents. Here's why it worked so consistently. Every Mongol soldier grew up on horseback, armed with a composite bow that could outrange most contemporary weapons, and organized into disciplined units of 10, capable of coordinated maneuvers no settled army of farmers, turned soldiers could easily match. speed and discipline beat numbers again and again. There was also a darker, deliberate strategy behind it. Cities that surrendered quickly were often spared. Cities that resisted were frequently destroyed completely, their populations killed or scattered, specifically so word would travel ahead of the army and convince the next city to simply open its gates. Terror, used this precisely, was itself a weapon. Within a single generation, Mongol armies conquered Central Asia, Persia, the Caucasus, and pushed deep into Eastern Europe, reaching the outskirts of Vienna itself. No empire in human history, ancient or modern, has ever controlled a larger unbroken stretch of territory than the one Genghis Khan's family assembled in barely 60 years. Along the way, Mongol forces destroyed some of the greatest cities on earth. Samarkand, one of the wealthiest cities on the Silk Road, was leveled during Genghis Khan's own campaigns. Decades later, his grandson Hulagu's army sacked Baghdad itself in 1258, ending 5 centuries of the Islamic Golden Age in a single catastrophic siege, reportedly destroying so many books from the city's libraries that the Tigris River ran black with ink. Genghis Khan himself died in 1227 during his final campaign against the Tengut, who had rebelled against Mongol rule. His actual burial site was deliberately hidden, reportedly by having horses trample the ground until every trace disappeared. To this day, nobody has ever found it. His son Ogedei succeeded him as Great Khan and finished what his father started, finally destroying the Yuan Dynasty in 1234 and bringing all of northern China under Mongol control for the first time. Decades of expansion followed under successive Great Khans, until in 1259, Genghis Khan's grandson Mongke died personally besieging a Song Dynasty fortress in Sichuan, probably from dysentery contracted during the campaign. It was an oddly small death for a man who ruled the largest empire on Earth, and it triggered a crisis nobody had planned for. Mongke left no clear heir, and 2 of his brothers, Kublai and Arik Boke, both claimed the title of Great Khan simultaneously. The resulting civil war took 4 years to resolve. Kublai won in 1264. The unified empire his grandfather had built never fully recovered from the split. The irony is that it was, in some ways, the most Mongol war imaginable. 2 branches of the same family, using the same tactics they'd perfected against everyone else, now turned on each other. Arik Boke, based near the traditional heartland at Karakoram, actually had the stronger claim by old steppe custom. Kublai, based in China, simply had more resources, and resources won. Arik Boke eventually surrendered in 1264 and was brought to Kublai's court, where he died 2 years later, under circumstances contemporaries found convenient enough to whisper about. Karakoram itself, the capital Genghis Khan's son had built, and the symbolic heart of the old unified empire, never recovered its former importance. Power and attention had permanently shifted south into China. In the aftermath, the empire effectively split into 4 separate khanates: the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia and the Middle East, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and whatever Kublai personally controlled, which was, by a wide margin, the richest and most populous of the 4. It was also, overwhelmingly, Chinese. Kublai understood something his grandfather never had to consider. ruling tens of millions of settled Chinese subjects required more than cavalry. It required legitimacy the Chinese themselves would recognize. He'd actually been preparing for this longer than most people realize. Years before declaring the Yuan Dynasty, Kublai had governed Chinese territory as a prince under the guidance of advisors like Liu Bingjong, a former Buddhist monk who taught him Confucian statecraft, taxation, and the administrative machinery that had run Chinese empires for 1,000 years. So in 1271, he did something no steppe conqueror had ever done. He gave his regime a proper Chinese dynastic name. He called it Yuan, meaning origin, or the primal beginning of all things, drawn from the ancient Book of Changes. For the first time in Chinese history, a non-Han ruler had formally claimed the mandate of heaven under a classical Chinese dynastic title, rather than simply ruling as an occupying foreign power. There was still unfinished business. The Southern Song, the wealthy, sophisticated dynasty that had held out against the Mongols for longer than any other power on earth, still controlled southern China. Kublai's general Bayan spent years grinding down its defenses, city by city, river fortress by river fortress. The key breakthrough came at the fortress city of Xiangyang, which had held out under siege for years until Kublai brought in Muslim engineers from Persia with a new generation of counterweight trebuchets, powerful enough to finally crack walls that had resisted everything the Mongols had thrown at them before. Once Xiangyang fell in 1273, the road south lay open. If you know how that story ends, the final naval battle at Yamen in 1279, the child emperor drowned in his prime minister's arms, an entire loyalist fleet destroyed, then you already know it. For the first time in Chinese history, every inch of the country was ruled by a foreign dynasty. The boy who'd actually been Song's reigning emperor before that final battle, captured years earlier when the Yuan first took the Song capital, wasn't executed. He was simply relocated. Kublai had him raised at court, then eventually sent, still a young man, to a monastery deep in Tibet to live out his life as an ordinary Buddhist monk, quietly erased from politics rather than killed for it. Kublai had already begun building something entirely new to mark the shift. A capital called Dadu, the Great Capital, built on the site of modern Beijing, deliberately distinct from Karakoram, the old Mongol capital out on the steppe. The message was unmistakable. This was no longer a nomadic empire that happened to rule China. This was a Chinese empire that happened to be ruled by Mongols. By the time Marco Polo arrived, Dadu's population is estimated to have reached several 100,000 people, a genuinely staggering city by the standards of the era, when London and Paris each held barely a tenth of that number behind their own walls. He also kept a second residence for the warmer months, a lavish summer capital called Chengdu, out on the grassland where the steppe met the settled world. You may actually already know its name in a different form. Centuries later, an English poet who'd never set foot in Asia immortalized it in a single famous opening line, Xanadu, where Kublai Khan did a stately pleasure dome decree. Around 1275, a young Venetian merchant named Marco Polo arrived at that court, traveling with his father and uncle along trade routes that Mongol control had made safer than they'd been in centuries. He would stay for roughly 17 years, reportedly serving Kublai in some official capacity, and later writing an account of what he'd seen that would shape European imagination of Asia for generations. Marco Polo described imperial banquets where thousands of guests dined together in strict ceremonial rank, served from gold and silver vessels, entertained by musicians and performers from across the empire, a scale and formality that made even the grandest European royal courts of the era look modest by comparison. What Marco Polo described sounded to European readers almost impossible. An empire where paper notes, not coins, functioned as everyday currency. A postal relay system of mounted couriers so efficient that messages could cross the entire empire in days rather than months. Cities larger and wealthier than anything in Europe at the time. That relay system, called the Yam, used tens of thousands of horses stationed at regular posting stations across the empire. So a single rider could sprint one stretch, hand off the message, and let a fresh horse and rider carry it onward, covering distances in days that would otherwise take merchant caravans months. Some details sound almost mundane now, but genuinely stunned him. He described a black stone that Chinese households burned for heat instead of wood, a substance Europe barely used yet, coal. He described a cloth that didn't burn in fire, asbestos, which European readers assumed had to be a fantasy invention. Europeans mostly didn't believe him. His book earned the nickname Il Milione, the Million Lies, and Polo reportedly spent his deathbed still insisting he hadn't told the half of what he'd actually seen. Modern historians have vindicated most of his account, and it's widely credited with helping inspire the age of European exploration 2 centuries later. Columbus himself reportedly carried an annotated copy on his own voyage west. Not everyone experienced Yuan rule the way Marco Polo did. Kublai's government formally divided the population into 4 legally distinct classes. Mongols at the top, Semu, meaning various categories, mostly Central Asian and Muslim allies, second, Northern Chinese third, and Southerners, former subjects of the wealthy, cultured Song Dynasty, at the very bottom of their own country. In practice, that second tier, the Semu, often meant Uyghur scribes, Persian financiers, and Central Asian merchants placed directly in charge of tax collection and provincial administration, trusted precisely because they owed the Mongols everything and owed the Chinese population underneath them nothing at all. The consequences were concrete. Top government posts were reserved for Mongols and Semu. Legal penalties for identical crimes varied by ethnicity. A Mongol who killed a Han commoner in a drunken dispute might face only a fine, while the reverse could mean execution. Ordinary Han and Southern Chinese were also barred at various points from owning weapons, keeping hunting falcons, or even gathering in large groups without official permission. Restrictions that read less like governance and more like an occupying power that never fully trusted the people it ruled. And for decades, Kublai simply suspended the imperial examination system altogether, the single institution that had defined Chinese governance and social mobility for 1,000 years. It wasn't fully restored until 1315, under an emperor named Ayurbarwada, and even then with fixed ethnic quotas that guaranteed Mongols and Semu candidates an easier path to the same degree. Han and Southern Chinese scholars still had to earn the hard way. It's worth noting Kublai didn't reject Chinese scholarship entirely. He personally employed a number of Confucian advisors in unofficial capacities throughout his reign, valued for their administrative expertise, even while the formal path that had traditionally produced men like them stayed closed to almost everyone else for a generation. Here's an unexpected side effect. With the traditional path into government simply closed to them, a huge pool of educated, talented Han scholars redirected their ambitions somewhere else entirely, toward vernacular theater. It would end up producing one of the genuine golden ages of Chinese drama, but we'll come back to that. Kublai wasn't satisfied ruling China alone. In 1274, he sent a combined Mongol and Korean fleet against Japan, which had refused for years to submit as a tributary state. The invasion force landed at Hakata Bay and fought Japanese samurai to a bloody standstill for a single day. Neither side had fought anyone quite like this before. The Japanese defenders, used to formal one-on-one duels, were shocked by coordinated Mongol infantry tactics and small gunpowder bombs. The Mongols, in turn, hadn't expected such fierce, disciplined resistance from a country they'd assumed would fold quickly. That night, a sudden storm forced the fleet to withdraw with heavy losses before either side could claim a real victory. Kublai tried again in 1281, this time with a genuinely staggering force, reportedly over 4,000 ships and 140,000 men, very possibly the largest seaborne invasion in world history up to that point. A massive typhoon struck the fleet while it sat anchored off the coast, destroying the majority of the ships and drowning tens of thousands of soldiers before they ever reached shore. The Japanese called it kamikaze, the divine wind, and the story of that storm shaped Japanese national identity for the next 660 years, right up through its infamous reuse as a name for suicide pilots in the final year of the Second World War. Kublai actually began preparing a third invasion of Japan afterward, ordering new fleets built along the southern coast. It was eventually canceled, partly due to the sheer cost after two failures, and partly because Kublai's attention and his treasury were increasingly needed elsewhere, in Vietnam, in Java, and in keeping his own restless empire together. Kublai's forces fared no better against Jai Viet, modern Vietnam, invading 3 separate times between the 1250s and 1288, and getting repelled every single time, most famously by the Vietnamese commander Tran Hung Giao, who lured Mongol river fleets onto beds of iron-tipped stakes hidden just below the waterline. The Vietnamese strategy wasn't really about winning open battles at all. Tran Hung Giao repeatedly abandoned his own capital, burned its supplies, and let the Mongol army occupy an empty city while heat, disease, and stretched supply lines did the real damage. By the time his forces struck back, the invaders were already exhausted and starving. A 1293 naval expedition against Java went similarly wrong. Kublai's fleet initially allied with a local prince against his rival, won the battle for him decisively, and then watched that same prince turn on his new allies the moment the fighting was over, ambushing the exhausted Mongol force and driving it back to its ships. It sailed home having won every battle, and the war itself not at all. Notice the pattern. On land, across 3 continents, this family had never really been stopped. At sea, every single overseas campaign Kublai launched ended in failure. The greatest land empire in human history simply never solved the ocean. Back home, Kublai's genuine achievements were considerable. He extended the Grand Canal, first built centuries earlier, and expanded again under the Song, so it ran directly to Dadu, letting grain from the rich southern provinces reach his new capital without the risk of coastal shipping. Sections of that route are still in use today. He also presided over what historians call the Pax Mongolica, a period when Mongol control over the entire route made the Silk Road safer for merchants and travelers than it had been in centuries. The very safety that had let a teenage Marco Polo cross half the known world with his family and actually survive the trip. His wife Chabi wasn't just a grieving footnote at the end of his story. Throughout his reign, she was a genuine political influence, reportedly convincing him to treat conquered Song territory with more restraint than his generals wanted, and personally redesigning Mongol court dress to be more practical for both riding and Chinese court ceremony alike. Religiously, Kublai was genuinely pluralistic. He personally patronized Tibetan Buddhism, adopting the Phagpa Lama as his religious teacher and commissioning a new script for the empire's many languages, while also allowing Taoism, Confucianism, Islam, and Nestorian Christianity to operate freely across his territory. His final years were harder than his first. His favorite wife, Chabi, died in 1281. His chosen heir, his son Genjin, died in 1285 before ever taking the throne. Kublai reportedly withdrew into heavy drinking and overeating, gaining enough weight in his final decade that gout left him barely able to walk unassisted. He died in 1294 after ruling for over 3 decades. Like his grandfather, his actual burial site was deliberately hidden according to Mongol custom. It has never been found. His grandson Temur Khan actually inherited the throne smoothly and ruled for over a decade with real competence, finally negotiating a lasting peace with the other Mongol Khanates that had splintered off decades earlier, and stabilizing the currency his grandfather had left slightly overextended. For a moment, it genuinely looked like the transition might hold. It didn't last. After Temur Khan died in 1307 without a surviving son, the throne changed hands 8 more times in roughly 4 decades, several emperors ruling only a handful of years, some dying under genuinely suspicious circumstances amid constant factional infighting between rival Mongol princes and their personal guard armies. The clearest example came in 1323. Emperor Yingzong, only 20 years old and attempting genuine reforms that threatened powerful court factions, was assassinated by his own guardsmen during an overnight stop at a place called Nanpo, in what history remembers as the Southern Slope Incident. The conspirators installed their own preferred candidate within days. The financial system Marco Polo had once found so remarkable actually worked on a simple principle. Merchants deposited silver with the government and received official notes backed by that reserve, redeemable on demand. It relied entirely on the government keeping enough silver in the vault to honor every note it printed. The financial system that had so impressed Marco Polo began to crack under the strain. To cover mounting deficits, the government simply printed more paper currency again and again, until by the 1350s, the notes had lost so much value that ordinary transactions reverted to bartering with grain and cloth instead. Nature made things dramatically worse. The Yellow River broke its banks repeatedly through the 1340s, flooding vast stretches of farmland and displacing millions of people. The government's response, conscripting hundreds of thousands of laborers to dig a new channel and redirect the river, echoed almost exactly the kind of resented forced labor that had doomed the Qin dynasty over 1,500 years earlier. A devastating plague swept through parts of China in the 1330s and 1340s as well, part of the same pandemic wave that would soon travel west along Mongol-controlled trade routes and arrive in Europe as the Black Death. Modern historians increasingly connect the two outbreaks directly. The same safe, efficient trade network that let Marco Polo travel so easily also let a pandemic travel with terrifying speed. The population numbers tell their own grim story. Some estimates put Yuan China's population at over 90 million people in its earlier decades. By the time the Ming Dynasty finally stabilized the country, a few decades after the collapse, the recorded population had fallen by tens of millions, a combination of plague, famine, warfare, and administrative breakdown that ranks among the deadliest demographic collapses in Chinese history. By the time Togon Temür took the throne as a child in 1333, the dynasty he inherited was buckling under flood, plague, worthless currency, and an ethnic hierarchy that had never actually won the loyalty of the population it governed. Nearly every crisis this dynasty had managed to avoid or postpone under Kublai and Temür Khan arrived at once, in the same decade, under a boy emperor who'd inherited a treasury already hollowed out by a century of overprinted currency and a bureaucracy too fractured by ethnic quotas and factional infighting to respond effectively to any of them, let alone all at once. The forced river labor project of the early 1350s was the final straw. Hundreds of thousands of exhausted, resentful conscripts, already worn down by years of flooding, plague, and crushing taxation, found themselves working side by side under armed guard, with plenty of time to talk. The spark had actually been smoldering for years before that. A preacher named Han Shantong had spent a decade building a secret religious network called the White Lotus Society, promising followers that a Buddha of the future was coming to end their suffering and that a hidden descendant of the Song Imperial line would soon reclaim the throne. In 1351, that resentment exploded into the Red Turban Rebellion, a millenarian religious uprising that would, within a single year, draw in a starving beggar monk you already know if you watch this channel's Ming Dynasty video. His name was Zhu Yuanzhang, and he joined this exact movement in 1352. He wasn't the only ambitious figure this collapse produced either. The warlords Chen Yuliang and Zhang Shicheng, both familiar names if you watch that video, carved out their own rival territories from this same chaos, and Zhu Yuanzhang would spend the next decade destroying both of them before he ever got around to actually finishing off the Yuan. By 1368, as covered in the Ming video, Zhu Yuanzhang's forces were closing in on Dadu itself. And here the story genuinely diverges from the two dynasties this channel has already covered. Togon Temür didn't die on a hill behind his palace. He didn't sign an abdication document either. For the next 17 years, the rebellion consumed the south while the Yuan court, paralyzed by its own generals feuding for personal advantage rather than coordinating against the actual threat, proved structurally incapable of mounting an effective unified response. He simply rode north, out through the gates of the capital his ancestors had built, back onto the Mongolian steppe his family had ridden out of a century and a half earlier, ahead of the advancing Ming army, with his court and household largely intact. From there he continued to rule what historians call the Northern Yuan, a rump Mongol state that kept claiming the imperial title from the steppe for decades, raiding the new Ming Dynasty's northern frontier for generations afterward. the very pressure, in fact, that would eventually help provoke the Tumu crisis you may remember from the Ming video, where a Ming emperor himself was captured on the same frontier a century later. Togun Temür died in Mongolia in 1370, technically still calling himself Emperor of the Great Yuan, 2 years after losing every single city his dynasty had ever governed. The Ming didn't just let his successors retreat in peace, either. In 1388, Ming General Shu Da led an army deep into Mongolia and captured Karakorum itself, the original Mongol capital Genghis Khan's own son had built, effectively ending organized northern Yuan resistance as a coherent state, even as scattered Mongol raids on the frontier continued for generations afterward. Mongolia itself never fully reunified after that. It splintered into rival tribal confederations for the next 2.5 centuries, until one of them allied with a rising Manchu power in the 1600s, the same Qing dynasty this channel just covered, which folded Mongolia into its own empire and, in a strange historical loop, finally succeeded at permanently absorbing the homeland. Genghis Khan's own descendants had never quite managed to reunite themselves. So what did 97 years actually leave behind? For one thing, the basic shape of Chinese local government. Kublai's system of branch secretariats, provincial administrative divisions run directly from the capital, became the direct ancestor of the province system China still uses today, a structural inheritance that has now outlived the dynasty that created it by well over 6 centuries. It also left genuine scientific achievement. Kublai's court astronomer, Guo Shoujing, built some of the most advanced observational instruments in the world at the time, and produced a calendar so precise it calculated the length of a year to within about 26 seconds of the modern figure, 3 centuries before Europe's own calendar reform caught up. And it left a lasting demographic legacy few people connect back to this dynasty. The Semu officials, soldiers, and merchants Kublai brought in from across Central Asia and the Muslim world settled permanently across China, and their descendants became the foundation of what is today China's Hui ethnic minority, still numbering in the millions. There was quieter, practical achievement too. An official named Wang Zhen compiled a comprehensive agricultural treatise under Yuan patronage, illustrated with detailed diagrams of farming tools and irrigation techniques from across the empire, deliberately spread to regions that had never had access to each other's methods before. A genuinely useful legacy from a government better remembered for conquest than cultivation. It also left an entire art form. Denied careers in government, that generation of frustrated scholars poured their talent into Zaju drama instead, producing enduring classics like The Injustice to Du Yi and The Romance of the West Chamber, plays still studied and performed in China today, arguably one of the most consequential creative side effects any dynasty on this channel has produced from pure political exclusion. And there's Marco Polo's book, still shaping how people imagine this era of Chinese history 700 years later, and still credited by historians as one of the sparks that eventually sent European ships looking for a sea route to the wealth he'd described. Ships that would, centuries later, arrive on China's shores under a very different flag. There's one more legacy worth naming, because this channel just covered it. Yuan was the first dynasty to prove a foreign conquest regime could successfully claim the mandate of heaven and rule China under its own dynastic tradition. 3.5 centuries later, the Manchu Qing studied exactly where that experiment had failed, its rigid, deeply resented ethnic hierarchy, and built something more durable on the lessons. That is the entire history of the Yuan Dynasty. 97 years, founded by a man who began life starving on the open steppe in a wooden slave collar and ended it as the grandson who ruled the largest land empire humanity has ever assembled. Undone in the end by the same combination of floods, plague, worthless currency, and a peasant rebellion that has sunk almost every dynasty this channel has ever covered. It's worth sitting with that for a second. This channel has now covered a dynasty that starved and clawed its way to power from nothing, a dynasty that conquered its way to power on horseback, and a dynasty that inherited an empire built by conquest and tried to hold it together with paperwork and a curtain. Every single one of them ended almost exactly the same way. A river that wouldn't behave, a currency nobody trusted anymore, and a peasant army that had simply run out of reasons to stay loyal. If you made it this far, thank you for sitting through nearly a century of Mongol rule with me. If you learned something, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Subscribe if you want more full dynasty histories like this one. And let me know in the comments which dynasty you want covered next. I'll see you in the next video.